In some families, love isn't sacred. It's strategy. What kind of mother offers you her younger daughter when you're already falling for the elder one? I came to Sukhothai for peace. I thought I found love. But that night, her mother didn't blink. She made the offer like it was normal, like I was supposed to just switch sisters. That's when I realized I wasn't joining a family. I was entering a game. If stories like this hit close to home, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I'm sitting on my porch in Sukhothai, watching Araya tend to our small garden. The morning sun catches the water droplets on her tomato plants, and, for a moment, everything feels perfect. It's been 8 months since I moved here permanently, and this quiet life feels like everything I never knew I wanted. Good morning, my love, my labia calls out in her careful English, wiping soil from her hands on her apron. Coffee is ready. This is our routine now. Every morning, the same gentle greeting, the same small smile that made me fall for her in the first place. Thank you, beautiful, I reply, though I know she prefers when I try Thai. Khop khun krap, I add, and she laughs at my pronunciation like she always does. That laugh, it's what convinced me to stay. Not the cheap cost of living or the warm weather, but that genuine sound of joy when I stumble through her language. We sit together on the wooden steps of our traditional house, steam rising from our cups. Today we go to temple ruins? She asks, already knowing the answer. It's Wednesday, and Wednesday is our walking day. We've explored every corner of this ancient city together, from the main tourist sites to the hidden paths only locals know. Always, I tell her, reaching for her hand. Her fingers are still cool from the garden work, and I squeeze them gently. I never imagined I'd be this content. After 32 years of marriage back in Ohio, after the divorce that left me with half a pension and no sense of purpose, I thought happiness was something for younger men. But here in this sleepy town that most tourists skip, I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for. You are happy here? Araya asks. As if, read, I might disappear. More than I ever been, I tell her, and I mean it. The locals accept me now. Old men wave from their motorbikes. Shop owners smile when I practice my broken Thai, and the temple monks nod respectfully when we pass. I'm not just a tourist anymore. I'm part of something. Good, she says, settling against my shoulder. This is your home now. That word home still gives me chills. I rent this wooden house for less than I paid for utilities in Ohio. I've started learning the language seriously, not just tourist phrases, but real conversation. The cultural differences that seemed overwhelming 6 months ago now feel like interesting puzzles to solve together. When Araya corrects my grammar or explains why I shouldn't point my feet toward the Buddha statue, it doesn't feel like criticism, it feels like care. What are you thinking about? She asks, tracing patterns on my palm with her fingertip. It's a habit of hers, this gentle touch that grounds me in the present moment. Just grateful, I say, though that doesn't capture the depth of it. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. For the first time in years, I wake up excited about the day ahead, instead of dreading how many hours I need to fill. The morning ritual continues with her teaching me new Thai phrases. Today it's words for garden tools, and she patiently corrects my tones until I can say shovel without making her giggle. You are a good student, she says, and I feel proud in a way I haven't since I was young. Learning her language feels like learning to see the world through her eyes, and I want to understand everything. As we prepare for our walk, I catch myself in the mirror by the door. I look different than I did 8 months ago. The constant worry lines have faded, and there's color in my cheeks from all our outdoor adventures. I look like a man who belongs somewhere, who has someone to belong to. Ready? Agria asks, adjusting her sun hat. Ready? I confirm, taking her hand as we step into the warm morning air. Walking through the temple ruins with her never gets old. She knows stories about every stone, every collapsed wall, every ancient Buddha statue. This king, she says, pointing to a weathered carving, he built this temple for his wife who died young. The sadness in her voice makes me squeeze her hand tighter. Like you build new life for me, she adds, looking up at me with those dark eyes that still make... This is my paradise, not the Thailand of backpacker hostels and full moon parties, but this quiet corner, where an old American man can start over with a woman who makes him feel young again. As we walk among the ruins of ancient love stories, I can't imagine wanting anything else. The memory of how we met still feels like a miracle. 6 months before I moved to Sukhothai permanently, I was in Bangkok, dealing with visa paperwork, staying in a cramped guest house on Khao San Road, feeling more lost than I'd ever been in my life. The divorce papers were still fresh in my bag, along with bank statements showing how little my ex-wife had left me. "You're free now," my lawyer had said, as if losing everything I'd worked for was some kind of gift. At 64, I felt anything but free. I felt discarded. My ex-wife had taken the house, half my pension, and somehow managed to turn my adult kids against me in the process. "Dad's having a midlife crisis," my daughter had said during our last phone call. "Maybe this break will help you figure out what you really want." What I really wanted was to feel needed again, but I couldn't tell her that. Thailand wasn't supposed to be about finding love. It was supposed to be about finding cheap beer and forgetting how badly I'd failed at marriage. But Bangkok overwhelmed me. Too many people, too much noise, too many reminders that I was just another broken Western man running away from his problems. I needed to get out of the city, but I had no idea where to go. That's when I walked into the travel agency where Aria worked. She was behind the counter, speaking rapid Thai to a young backpacker, and when she looked up at me, her smile was completely genuine. Not the practiced smile of someone trying to sell me something, but the real thing. "Hello, sir, how can I help you today?" she asked in perfect English. "I need to go somewhere quiet," I told her, not sure how to explain that I was running from the wreckage of my old life. "Somewhere I can think." She studied my face for a moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. Not pity, but understanding. "You want to see real Thailand?" she asked. "Not tourist." That's how she convinced me to visit Sukhothai. "It's my hometown," she explained, pulling out brochures of ancient temples and explaining the history with genuine passion. "Very peaceful, good for thinking." When I hesitated, she added, "I can show you personally, if you like. I know all the best places." Looking back, I should have been suspicious of such an offer, but I was so starved for genuine human connection that I said yes without thinking. "When can we go?" I asked, and her face lit up with excitement. "This weekend? I take time off work. You will love it." Those 3 days changed everything. Aria didn't want my money or visa help. She had her own small business selling textiles and seemed genuinely proud of her independence. She just seemed to enjoy my company, my stories about life in America, and my terrible attempts at pronouncing Thai words. "You are funny, man," she would say when I mispronounced something, but she always corrected me gently. On our second day, as we walked through the main temple complex, she asked me about my marriage. Why you come Thailand alone, she wanted to know. I found myself telling her everything, the years of growing apart, the fighting, the way my ex-wife had made me feel like I was never enough. "She sounds like unhappy woman," Araya said simply. "Unhappy people make others unhappy too." That night, sitting by the hotel pool, she told me about her own failed relationships. "Thai men, they want traditional wives," she explained, "but I have business, I have opinions. They don't like this." I understood completely. "American women want careers too," I said, "but they also want you to read their minds and know exactly what they need without them telling you." We laughed about the impossibility of relationships, but there was something deeper happening. She listened to me in a way my ex-wife never had. When I told her about losing my job 2 years before the divorce, about feeling useless and old, she didn't try to fix me or tell me what I should do. She just nodded and said, "Change is hard, but maybe sometimes change is gift." On the last day, neither of us wanted to say goodbye. "You could come back," she said as we waited for my bus to Bangkok. "Sukothai is always here." I wanted to tell her I'd be back, but I was afraid of making promises I couldn't keep. Instead, I kissed her cheek and said, "Thank you for showing me your world." During the long bus ride to Bangkok, I couldn't stop thinking about those 3 days, not just about Aria, though she was part of it, but about how peaceful I'd felt in Sukhothai, how the slow pace of life had allowed me to breathe for the first time in years, how the ancient temples had made my modern problems seem smaller and more manageable. Back in Bangkok, everything felt wrong. The noise, the crowds, the constant hustle, it all reminded me of the stress I was trying to escape. I found myself texting Aria constantly, asking about her day, sharing photos of my lonely meals. "You miss Sukothai?" she would ask. "I miss you," I would reply, and she would send back a simple heart emoji. 2 weeks later, I made the decision that changed my life. I called the airline and changed my return ticket to Ohio. Instead of going back to my empty apartment and my empty life, I was going back to Sukhothai, to see if what I'd felt there was real, and to see if a broken American man could really start over in a small Thai town with a woman who made him feel whole again. 3 weeks into my permanent move to Sukhothai, Araya announced it was time to meet her family. "My mother wants to cook for you," she said, and I could hear the nervousness in her voice. "She's been asking when she can meet the American who stole her daughter's heart." The way she said it made me both proud and terrified. I was about to be evaluated by a Thai mother, and I had no idea what the criteria were. "What should I bring?" I asked, pacing around our small living room. "What are the rules?" Araya laughed at my panic. "Just be yourself," she said, "but maybe practice your Y greeting. And don't point your feet at anyone." She spent the next hour drilling me on basic etiquette, and I felt like a student cramming for the most important exam of my life. The night of the dinner, I stood outside Theda's small restaurant with a bag of gifts: orchids for the house, good whiskey for the men, and toys for any children, sweating despite the evening breeze. "Remember," Araya whispered, "when my mother speaks, listen carefully. She doesn't speak much English, but she understands more than she lets on." The family gathering was overwhelming but warm. Aunts, cousins, neighbors, everyone wanted to meet the American uncle. I bowed and smiled and tried to remember not to touch anyone's head, while children peeked at me from behind their mother's legs. "Welcome, welcome," Theda called out, in broken English, embracing me with surprising strength. She was smaller than I'd expected, but her presence filled the room. "Thank you for having me," I said, attempting a proper Y. The children giggled at my formal gesture, and Theda beamed with approval. "You respect our ways," she said in careful English. "This is good." I felt like I'd passed the first test. Dinner was a feast of dishes I couldn't identify, but pretended to enjoy. Theda kept piling food on my plate, while firing questions at Araya in rapid Thai. I caught enough words to know she was asking about my pension, my plans, whether I was serious about her daughter. "Tell her I'm very serious," I said to Araya. "Tell her I want to take care of." When Araya translated, Theda's eyes softened. She reached across the table and patted my hand. "Good man," she said in English. "I can see in your eyes, good heart." The approval in her voice made me feel like I'd won something precious. That's when I first really noticed Nim. Araya's younger sister had been quiet during most of the meal, helping serve food and translating when needed. She was 32, recently divorced, with a shy 8-year-old daughter who kept staring at me with wide eyes. "She's never seen a Farang up close," Nim explained in perfect English. "She thinks you're very tall." "Tell her I think she's very smart," I said, and when Nim translated, the little girl broke into giggles. "She wants to know if all American men are as nice as you," Nim added, and something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. There was a sadness in her eyes that reminded me of my own reflection after the divorce. "You speak English very well," I told her. "Better than me sometimes." She smiled at the compliment. "I studied in Bangkok before I married," she said. "I wanted to be a teacher, but my husband preferred I stay home." The past tense hung in the air between us, and I understood why she'd moved back to Sukhothai with her daughter. As the evening progressed, I found myself drawn into easy conversation with the whole family. They asked about America, about snow, about why I'd chosen Thailand over other countries. "Thailand chose me," I said, looking at Araya. "Your daughter chose me." When this was translated, everyone laughed and raised their glasses. Theda pulled me aside as the evening wound down. "You make my daughter happy," she said, her English careful but clear. "But you must understand, she is all I have. If you hurt her—" She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was crystal clear. "I would never hurt her," I promised. "I love her too much." "Good," Theda said, embracing me again. "Then you are family now. Family takes care of family." The weight of those words settled on my shoulders like a blessing and a responsibility. I wasn't just dating Araya anymore. I was being welcomed into something bigger than both of us. As we prepared to leave, little gifts were pressed into my hands. Homemade cookies, small carved elephants, a book of basic Thai phrases. "For study," Nim said, handing me the language book. If you're going to be part of this family, you need to speak properly. Her smile was warm, but there was something else in her expression I couldn't quite read. Walking home with Araya, I felt a contentment I'd never experienced with my ex-wife's family. "They like you," she said, squeezing my arm. "My mother especially." She said, "You have kind eyes." I thought about Theda's fierce protectiveness, Nim's gentle translation help, and the way even the children had warmed up to me by the end of the night. "I like them too," I said. "It feels like I belong somewhere." Araya stopped walking and turned to face me. "You do belong," she said. "You belong with us." Under the streetlights, surrounded by the quiet sounds of Sukhothai at night, I believed her completely. I had found my family, and they had found me. What could be more perfect than that? 2 months after the family dinner, I started noticing small changes. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could point to and say, "This is wrong," but the rhythm of our days felt different. Araya would still greet me each morning with coffee and a smile, but the smile seemed to reach her eyes less often. "You okay?" I'd ask, and she'd wave me off with, "Just tired, that's all." The first thing I noticed was her phone. She'd always been a light texter, but suddenly she was typing in rapid Thai at all hours. During our evening conversations on the porch, she'd glance at her screen every few minutes. "Who's messaging you so much?" I asked one night, trying to keep my tone light. "Family business," she said without looking up. "Nothing important." But it felt important, the way she held her phone protectively, the way she'd step away to take certain calls, the way she'd switch to rapid Thai mid-sentence when someone interrupted us. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, she had a life before me, relationships and responsibilities I wasn't part of. I had no right to expect her complete attention all the time. The morning coffee ritual started to slip next. "I need to help my mother early today," she'd say, avoiding my eyes. "You don't mind having breakfast alone?" Of course I minded, but I couldn't say that without sounding needy. So I'd sit on our porch by myself, drinking coffee that tasted different when I made it, watching the garden she'd planted but no longer tended. Our intimate moments became less frequent too. When I reached for her at night, she'd curl into me but seem distracted. "Everything all right?" I'd whisper, and she'd nod against my chest. "Just thinking about work," she'd say. "The textile business is slow right now." When I offered to help financially, she pulled away completely. "I don't want to depend on you for money," she said, and there was an edge to her voice I'd never heard before. "I take care of myself." I respected that independence. It was one of the things I loved about her, but the rejection stung. I was trying to help, to be useful, and she was pushing me away. The family dinners became strange too. Theda would still welcome me warmly, but I noticed her watching me differently. During one meal, she made a comment in Thai that made everyone laugh except Araya, who looked uncomfortable. "What did she say?" I asked, but Araya just shook her head. "Nothing important, just a joke." Nim started asking more questions about my life in America. "Do you miss your children?" she wanted to know. "Do you ever think about going back?" When I told her I had no reason to return, that my kids barely spoke to me anymore, her expression softened with what looked like sympathy. "That must be very lonely," she said, "starting over in a new country at your age." "It's not likely when you have people who care about you," I replied, looking at Araya. But she was staring at her plate, pushing food around with her fork. Nim glanced between us and said something in Thai to her mother. Theda nodded and made a comment. That included the word farang, foreigner. I was beginning to understand enough Thai to catch that. "What are they saying?" I asked Araya later as we walked home. "They're worried about you," she said. "They think you seem sad lately." That stopped me in my tracks. "I'm not sad," I protested. "I'm the happiest I've ever been." But even as I said it, I wondered if it was still true. The doubts crept in slowly. During my solitary morning coffee, I'd find myself analyzing every interaction, every change in routine. Was Araya pulling away, or was I being oversensitive? Were the family comments innocent, or was there something I wasn't understanding? I'd lived through one marriage where communication broke down, gradually, and the pattern felt familiar. At the weekly market, I overheard 2 expat retirees talking about their Thai girlfriends. "They're sweet until they're not," one said. "Then suddenly you're financing the whole family and wondering what happened to the woman you fell in love with." I wanted to dismiss it as bitter talk from men who'd chosen poorly, but their words echoed in my mind. One evening I found Arya on the phone speaking in urgent whispered Thai. When she saw me, she quickly said goodbye and hung up. "Who was that?" I asked. "My mother," she said, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. She needed advice about the restaurant. I wanted to believe her, but something in her posture told me it was more complicated than that. That night, lying in bed with Arya curled against me, but feeling miles away, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I was losing my mind. Maybe the cultural differences were bigger than I'd thought. Maybe I was expecting too much from a relationship that had always been more fragile than I'd realized. Maybe paradise was just a temporary state, and now, real life was setting in. But I pushed the doubts away. I loved her, she loved me, and we were building something beautiful together. These were just normal relationship adjustments, the kind of small challenges every couple faces. We were probably overthinking everything, reading problems into situations that were perfectly innocent. After all, she was still here, still sharing our life together. That had to mean something. The dinner at Thaida's restaurant that night felt different from the start. Arya seemed withdrawn, barely touching her food and contributing little to the conversation. "I have headache," she said when her mother asked what was wrong. "I think I go home early tonight." She kissed my cheek and squeezed my shoulder. "You stay, talk with family. They like spending time with you." After she left, an uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Theda cleared the dishes while Nim helped her daughter with homework in the corner. I was about to make my own excuses to leave when Theda returned with a bottle of rice wine and 3 glasses. "We talk now," she said in her careful English, gesturing for Nim to join us. The rice wine burned going down, but Theda refilled my glass immediately. "You are good man," she began, speaking slowly. "I watch you many months. You have kind heart, you respect our family, you take care of my daughter." I started to thank her, but she held up a hand. "But I worry about Arya. She is, how do you say, complicated woman." Nim shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Maybe we should talk about this another time," she said in English. But Theda shook her head and continued in Thai, with Nim reluctantly translating. "She says Arya has never wanted marriage, never wanted children. She's always been independent, focused on her business." "That's fine," I said, though my heart was starting to race. "I respect her independence." Theda spoke rapidly in Thai again, and Nim's face reddened as she translated. "She says you're a man who wants a real family, someone who will cook for you, take care of you, give you the home life you deserve." The conversation was making me deeply uncomfortable, but I couldn't figure out how to escape it politely. Theda poured more wine and continued speaking, occasionally throwing in English words like good husband and stable life. Then she looked directly at Nim and said something that made the younger woman's eyes widen in shock. "What did she say?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Nim looked at her mother, then at me, then back at her mother. They had a rapid exchange in Thai that sounded like an argument. Finally, Nim took a deep breath and looked at me directly. "She thinks you should consider me instead of I." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" I managed to say. Theda nodded enthusiastically and began speaking again, with Nim translating in a flat, embarrassed voice. "She says I need a stable man. I have a daughter who needs a father figure. I speak better English than Arya. I understand Western ways. I want the kind of family life you're looking for." I sat in stunned silence as they continued explaining their reasoning. This wasn't presented as romantic. It was practical, almost businesslike. Nim was educated, worked at the bank, would appreciate the security I could provide. She was ready to be a wife in ways Arya would never be. It would keep me in the family, solve everyone's problems, and give me the traditional home life I clearly wanted. "I understand this is surprising," Nim said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But maybe you should think about it. Arya cares for you, but she's not the woman you think she is. She doesn't want what you want." The honesty in her voice was almost worse than the proposal itself. Theda reached across the table and patted my hand. "You think about it," she said in English. "No pressure. But Nim is good woman. She make you happy in ways Arya cannot." The certainty in her voice suggested this wasn't a spontaneous idea. They've been discussing this for weeks, maybe months. "But I love Arya," I finally managed to say. The word sounded weak even to me. Theda and Nim exchanged another look, and I saw something pass between them. Pity, maybe, or resignation. Love is not always enough, Nim said softly. Sometimes practical is better than romantic. I stood up so quickly my chair nearly fell over. I need to go, I said, backing toward the door. I'm sorry, but I can't. I need to think. Theda called after me in Thai, but I was already out on the street, gulping the night air like a drowning man. Walking home through the quiet streets of Sukhothai, my mind reeled with questions. How long had they been planning this? Did Araya know? Was this why she'd been distant lately? Because her family was pressuring her to step aside for her sister? The conversation replayed in my head, each word carrying new weight and meaning. By the time I reached our house, I was shaking with confusion and anger. Not at them, exactly. They'd been honest about what they thought was best for everyone involved, but at the situation, at the cultural misunderstandings, at my own naivety in thinking love was simple enough to transcend everything else. I sat on our porch until dawn, staring at the garden Araya had planted, wondering if anything I'd believed about our relationship was real. When she came home the next morning, I would have to confront her about the conversation, and I already suspected that what she told me would change everything I thought I knew about the life we'd built, together in paradise. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on our porch, watching the stars fade into dawn, replaying every word of the conversation with Theda and Nim. When Araya's motorbike puttered up the driveway at 7 in the morning, I was still in the same chair, still wearing the same clothes, still trying to make sense of what had happened. "You're up early," she said, climbing the steps with a forced smile. "Did you have good time with my family?" There was something in her voice, a carefulness that told me she already knew what we'd talked about. "We need to discuss what your mother told me last night," I said, and I watched her shoulders sag with resignation. She sat down across from me, not touching, not even looking at me directly. "What did she say?" she asked, though we both knew she already knew. "She suggested I should be with Nim instead of you," I said. "She said you don't want the same things I want. She said this would be better for everyone." Araya was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. Finally, she looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Relief. "She shouldn't have said that," she said softly. "But she's not wrong." The admission hit me harder than I'd expected. "So you knew about this," I said. It wasn't a question. "You knew they were planning to replace you with your sister." She flinched at the word replace, but she didn't deny it. "My mother has been talking about it for weeks," she admitted. "She thinks you would be happier with Nim." "And what do you think?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Araya took a deep breath and finally met my eyes. "I think she might be right," she said. "I love you, but I'm not the woman you want me to be. I never wanted marriage, never wanted children. I was happy with what we had. But you want more." The honesty was devastating because it was true. I had been imagining a future with her that she'd never signed up for. "But we were happy," I protested. "We had something good." She nodded. "But you want a wife who will cook your dinner every night and make you the center of her world. That's Nim, not me." "I never asked you to change," I said, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. I had been hoping she'd want more, that our relationship would naturally evolve into something deeper and more traditional. "You didn't have to ask," she said. "I could see it in your eyes, the way you looked at other couples, the way you talked about the future. You want a family, and I can't give you that." We sat in silence as the morning sun climbed higher. Somewhere in the distance, temple bells were ringing, and the sound felt like a funeral dirge. For the relationship I'd thought we had. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Do I just move on to your sister like I'm trading in an old car?" "It's not like that," Araya said, and for the first time there was pain in her voice. "Nim is a good woman. She's been hurt by her divorce and she needs someone stable. You need someone who wants the same things you want. Maybe it could work." The clinical way she discussed it made me feel sick. "And what about love?" I asked. "What about what we have together?" She looked at me with such sadness that I almost wished she'd been angry instead. "What we have is real," she said, "but it's not enough for you, and it's not fair to me. I can't pretend to want things I don't want, just to make you happy." The conversation was destroying me because it wasn't cruel, it was just honest. She wasn't leaving me for another man or because she'd stopped caring. She was being truthful about who she was and what she could offer, and I was finally being forced to confront the fact that I'd been in love with an idealized version of her, rather than the real person. "I've been projecting my desires onto you," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "I've been seeing what I wanted to see instead of who you actually are." She nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. "And I let you," she said, "because I liked being loved, even if it was for someone I'm not." "Where does that leave us?" I asked. "Can we go back to what we had before?" But I already knew the answer. The spell was broken, the fantasy shattered. We couldn't unknow what we now knew about each other and ourselves. "I don't think we can," she said softly. "Too much has been said. Too much has changed." As I sat there watching the woman I loved admit that our relationship had been built on mutual self-deception, I felt something inside me crumble. Not just my heart, but my whole sense of what I was doing in Thailand, what I was running toward, what I thought I'd found. The paradise I'd built in Sukothai was collapsing, and I was the one who'd laid the foundation on sand. The next few weeks were torture. I continued my routine in Sukhothai, but everything felt hollow. Araya and I maintained a polite distance. She still helped with translations when I went to the market, still explained cultural nuances when I was confused, but the intimacy was gone. We were like polite roommates sharing a house that neither of us wanted to be in anymore. The family dinners became exercises in awkwardness. Theda would smile at me with hopeful eyes, making pointed comments about Nim's cooking skills or her daughter's need for a father figure. "She made this curry herself," Theda would say, gesturing to a dish Nim had prepared. "Very traditional recipe. Good for husband." The commentary was about as subtle as a sledgehammer. Nim herself seemed caught between embarrassment and practical consideration of her mother's matchmaking. She'd catch my eye across the table and give me apologetic looks, but she didn't tell her mother to stop. During one particularly uncomfortable dinner, she helped me with a translation and our hands brushed as she passed me the dictionary. "Sorry," she whispered, pulling back quickly. "I know this is strange for you." "It's strong for all of us," I replied, and she nodded with understanding. For the first time, I saw her as an individual rather than just a Rhea sister or a potential replacement. She was a woman who'd been hurt by divorce, trying to rebuild her life while managing her mother's expectations and her own loneliness. "I don't want you to feel pressured," I told her. "This isn't your fault." "But it could be a solution," she said quietly, glancing toward the kitchen where her mother was busy with dishes. "For both of us. I need stability. You need someone who wants what you want." The matter-of-fact way she said it reminded me of her mother's practical approach to relationships. "Is that enough for a marriage?" I asked. "Mutual need?" She considered this seriously. "In Thailand, many marriages start with practical reasons," she said. "Love comes later, if you're lucky. In America, you start with love and hope practical things work out. Maybe neither way is perfect." Her wisdom surprised me, and I found myself actually considering what she was saying. But then I'd look across the room at Araya, who was helping her niece with homework, and I'd remember what we'd had before everything got complicated. The easy conversations, the shared laughter, the way she'd made me feel understood for the first time in years. How could I just transfer those feelings to someone else, like switching channels on a television? I started spending more time alone, walking the temple ruins and questioning every choice that had brought me here. The ancient stones that had once felt like witnesses to my happiness now seemed to mock my naivety. Had I really thought I could escape the complications of human relationships by moving to a different country? Had I been that foolish? Other expats in town began to notice my isolation. At the weekly market, I'd see them in clusters, sharing stories and complaints about their Thai partners, their visa issues, their cultural misunderstandings. I'd always avoided those conversations before, but now I found myself listening more carefully to their warnings and regrets. That's when Frank found me. He was an Australian retiree who'd been in Sukothai for 5 years, weathered and wise in the way of men who'd survived multiple cultural adaptations. He sat down next to me at a local bar one evening, ordered 2 beers and said, You look like a man who's been thinking too hard." "Maybe I haven't been thinking hard enough," I replied. Frank laughed and took a long drink. "Let me guess," he said. "Family complications, cultural misunderstandings, someone suggesting a different arrangement than what you thought you had." His accuracy was unsettling. "Does it show that much?" I asked. "Mate, I've seen that exact expression on a dozen Western faces over the years," Frank said. "Thailand has a way of showing you what you don't know about yourself, usually the hard way." He told me about his own experience with a Thai woman whose family had similar expectations and complications. "The thing is," Frank continued, "they're not wrong about how relationships work here. Family input, practical considerations, thinking about what's best for everyone involved. That's normal. We're the ones with the Hollywood ideas about love conquering all." His words stung because they rang true. "What did you do?" I asked. "I learnt to adapt, or leave," he said simply. "No shame in either choice, but you can't stay in limbo forever. It's not fair to anyone involved." That night, walking home through the quiet streets, I realized he was trapped. The transfamilian fantasy I'd built and the practical reality everyone else was living in. The loneliness was crushing because I couldn't go home. There was nothing left for me in Ohio. No job, no house, no relationships worth salvaging. But I couldn't stay in this emotional purgatory either, watching Aria pretend everything was fine while her family orchestrated my transfer to her sister. Something had to change, and I was the only one who could change it. After a month of this painful limbo, I woke up one morning and knew I couldn't continue living in this strange, suspended state. I found Aria in the garden, tending to plants that had started to wilt from neglect. "We need to talk," I said, and she looked up with something that might have been relief in her eyes. "I'm in Sukhothai," I told her directly. "Not Thailand, but this situation. I found a small apartment in Chiang Mai." She set down her watering can and studied my face. "When?" she asked, and I could hear the mixture of sadness and relief in her voice. "Next week. I've already put down a deposit." "This is probably best," she said quietly, and that simple acceptance hurt more than any argument would have. "For both of us. You need to find what you're really looking for, and I need to be honest about who I am." We stood there in the morning sun, surrounded by the garden we'd planted together, acknowledging the end of something that had never been as real as we'd pretended. "I want you to know," I said, "I don't regret any of it. What we had was real, even if it wasn't what I thought it was." She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "It was real for me too," she said, "but real doesn't always mean forever." That evening, I had one final conversation with Theda and Nim. I wanted everything clear, no misunderstandings, so I hired a translator from town to make sure my words were exact. We sat in Theda's restaurant after closing time, the three of us around a table loaded with tea and uncomfortable silences. "I want to thank you both for your honesty and your hospitality," I began, waiting for the translation. "You welcomed me into your family and treated me with kindness, but I need to build a life based on who I actually am, not who someone else needs me to be." The translator worked carefully, and I watched their faces for reactions. Theodore nodded slowly and spoke in Thai. "She says she understands," the translator told me. "She says you are an honorable man for being honest instead of pretending." There was respect in her expression that I hadn't expected. "She says she hopes you find happiness." Nim was quieter, more conflicted. "I'm sorry it didn't work out," she said in English. "Maybe in different circumstances." She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. "You're a good woman," I told her. "You deserve someone who chooses you first, not as a consolation prize. Your mother's right that you need stability, but you also deserve to be loved for yourself." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Thank you for seeing me as a person, not just a solution," she said. "I hope Chiang Mai brings you peace." For the first time, I saw her as an individual, rather than part of the family dynamic that had consumed us all. She was someone trying to rebuild her life after divorce, just like I was, and she deserved better than being offered as a replacement for her sister affections. The next week passed in a blur of packing and arrangements. I sorted through 8 months of accumulated possessions, deciding what to ship to Chiang Mai and what to leave behind. Araya helped me organize everything with the same careful attention She'd always shown, and I realized this was her way of caring for me, even as we said goodbye. "Will you be okay?" I asked her on my last night in the house. We were sitting on the porch where we'd shared so many morning coffees, where I'd thought I'd found my forever home. "I will be," she said. "Will you?" I considered the question seriously. "I think so, eventually." The morning I left, she rode with me to the bus station. We didn't say much during the ride. Everything important had already been said. At the terminal, she hugged me tightly. "Take care of yourself," she whispered. "Find someone who wants what you want." I wanted to tell her I still loved her, but it felt selfish to burden her with that truth. The bus pulled away from Sukhothai. I watched the ancient temples fade into the distance. I was leaving behind the town where I'd thought I'd found my paradise, the woman I'd thought would complete my life, and the family I'd thought would heal the loneliness that had driven me to Thailand in the first place. But I was also leaving with my dignity intact, having chosen honesty over convenience, self-respect over settling for something that would never, truly, satisfy anyone involved. 6 months later, I'm writing this from my small apartment in Chiang Mai. The morning sun streams through windows that overlook a busy street instead of ancient temple ruins, and I'm drinking coffee I made myself instead of sharing it with someone who made my heart race. But for the first time since leaving Ohio, I'm not running toward or away from anything. I've joined an expat photography group that meets twice a week. We explore the mountains around Chiang Mai, capturing images of waterfalls and hill tribe villages, and slowly I'm building friendships based on shared interests, rather than romantic desperation. "You seem different than when you first arrive," Sarah, a British retiree, told me last week. "More settled, less hungry." She was right. I had been hungry, starving really, for connection, for purpose, for someone to make me feel valuable again. That hunger had made me see what I wanted to see, instead of what was actually there. It had made me project my needs onto Araya instead of accepting her for who she was. It had made me vulnerable to a fantasy that was never sustainable. Maybe that's what I'd learned about love. Real love doesn't want someone to be different than they are. I'd loved the idea of Araya, the role I'd imagined her playing in my life, but I'd never fully accepted her reality. Her independence, her disinterest in traditional marriage, her focus on her business, these weren't flaws to be overcome, but essential parts of who she was. I don't blame Thaida for trying to make the best match for her family's needs. In her world, practical considerations matter as much as romantic feelings, and she was trying to solve multiple problems with one solution. I don't blame Nim for considering the arrangement. She was a divorced mother trying to provide stability for her daughter while managing her own loneliness. And I don't blame myself for wanting love and companionship after my divorce left me feeling worthless and alone. But I've learned that real love can't be built on the foundation of what you need someone else to be for you. It has to be built on accepting who they actually are and being someone worthy of that acceptance in return. The love I'd thought I found in Sukhothai was really just mutual loneliness, dressed up as romance, two people trying to use each other to escape from problems that could only be solved individually. Last week I got a message from Maria, just a simple photo of the garden behind our old house, now flourishing under her care. "Hope your new life is growing well too," she wrote. I stared at that photo for a long time, remembering the morning coffees and evening walks, the language lessons and cultural discoveries. I still loved those memories, but they belonged to a different version of myself, a man who'd thought happiness was something someone else could give him. I'm learning to be happy with my own company. Not the desperate happiness of someone running from loneliness, but the quiet contentment of someone who's made peace with himself. I may find love again someday, but if I do, it will because I have something to offer, rather than something I need to take. It will be because I can accept someone completely, rather than trying to reshape them into the person I think I need. The ancient stones of Sukhothai taught me that all things pass, empires rise and fall, love comes and goes, and the only constant is change itself. But the lesson I'm still learning in Chiang Mai is that some things endure. Self-respect, honesty, the capacity to grow from our mistakes, these are the foundations that can support real love when it comes not the desperate hunger that had driven me from Ahaya to comfort safety to someone to save me. Sometimes late at night, when the sounds of Chiang Mai fade into quiet, I think about the life I thought I was building in Sukothai. Part of me will always wonder what might have been if I'd been wiser, more culturally aware, less needy. But mostly I'm grateful for the experience, even the painful parts. It showed me what I was really looking for, not a woman to complete me, but the completion that can only come from within. I'm 65 years old, starting over in a foreign country for the second time, and I finally understand what my ex-wife meant when she said I needed to figure out what I really wanted. What I wanted wasn't a Thai wife or an American wife or any wife at all. What I wanted was to stop being afraid of my own loneliness, to stop seeing it as something shameful that needed to be fixed by someone else's love. The temple bells still ring in Chiang Mai, just like they did in Sukhothai, marking the hours of days that are mine alone to fill, and for the first time in my adult life that solitude doesn't feel like punishment, it feels like freedom.